The investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has now reached a deeply disturbing turning point that is leaving both authorities and the public in absolute shock. After weeks of intensive searching that turned up nothing, newly uncovered evidence is forcing investigators to confront a harsh, unavoidable conclusion. In the beginning, officials struggled to reconcile the troubling physical clues with Nancy's fragile medical condition, which only complicated their understanding of the case. But now, troubling new statements from her immediate family are directing everyone's attention toward a single devastating outcome. Behind the scenes, the entire investigative strategy has shifted in a profound and unsettling way. The early sense of hope that everyone clung to has been replaced by a colder, more pragmatic approach. As more information continues to surface, law enforcement is beginning to suspect a reality far darker than anyone initially believed. This incident was not random. Nancy Guthrie appears to have been deliberately targeted. To stay updated on every new development in this case as it continues to unfold, do me a favor, subscribe, drop a like, and keep those notifications on. We're going to be following this one closely. For several weeks now, Nancy's disappearance has cast a long, heavy shadow over the entire city of Tucson. It has become one of the most difficult and emotionally charged cases the area has ever seen. Authorities have worked tirelessly, following hundreds of leads and utilizing every available forensic resource at their disposal. Every single lead has been carefully examined. Every possible path has been pursued. Yet there is still an overwhelming absence of answers. No physical evidence has revealed her whereabouts. No clear explanation has emerged for what exactly occurred inside her home that night. As time passed, the nature of the investigation shifted dramatically, transitioning from what everyone hoped would be a rescue effort into something far more somber. What once looked like a standard missing person case has now evolved into a complex psychological puzzle that feels light years removed from routine police work. Today, senior officials are using language that suggests the involvement of a truly sinister force. The case took a decisive turn on March 12, 2026, when Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the public. He revealed a crucial detail that had been kept confidential until that moment, stating with firm conviction that investigators have identified the psychological motive behind a carefully planned act that specifically targeted Nancy. Although his statement carried a tone of confidence, he remained carefully measured, emphasizing that the investigation still lacks the definitive evidence required to officially close the case. Despite that caution, the sheriff's remarks sent a powerful wave of shock through the local community. Authorities have now moved completely away from the idea of a random encounter. They are concluding that Nancy was deliberately selected. During the same briefing, the sheriff delivered a far more unsettling warning to the public. He stressed that the individual responsible is still at large and continues to pose a serious threat. His voice carried a chilling edge as he warned residents not to feel safe simply because the crime appeared highly specific. Within hours of that announcement, the atmosphere across the area shifted dramatically. The sense of normal suburban calm was replaced by an overwhelming tension and fear that you could feel in the air. Let's break this down in forensic terms, because this is where the story gets truly terrifying. A targeted victim suggests an offender who carefully plans every single detail in advance. Such an individual likely constructed the entire sequence of events with precision and emotional detachment. This level of premeditation is far more alarming than a failed burglary or an opportunistic crime. Analysts following the case note that the available forensic evidence strongly supports this more calculated and intentional scenario. Morgan Wright, who leads the National Cold Case Center, has stated that the operational structure of the crime leaves virtually no room for coincidence. He suggests that an abduction carried out with this level of control would require prolonged surveillance and significant psychological preparation. The perpetrator likely studied the layout of the home and closely observed Nancy's daily routines in order to execute a flawless removal. The fact that she was taken without alerting any neighbors indicates a situation defined by complete tactical control. Such dominance is rarely seen in crimes driven by impulse or desperation. Wright also pointed to a crucial forensic detail. There were no signs of forced entry or typical theft within the residence. If financial gain had been the motive, the scene would likely show clear signs of disorder or missing valuables. Instead, everything indicates that the sole objective was Nancy herself. From a behavioral perspective, taking nothing but the victim reinforces the idea of a highly personal and pre-planned act. She appears to have been the intended focus from the very beginning, leading some experts to suspect that the scene may have been intentionally manipulated. The setting could have been carefully arranged to misdirect investigators and conceal the true nature of the crime. If confirmed, such staging would demonstrate that this disappearance was not random, but rather a controlled and methodical operation. It reflects the execution of a deliberate plan rather than an unpredictable event. Drawing from her extensive experience within both the FBI and CIA, Tracy Walder maintains that this incident bears none of the characteristics of a random burglary. She explains that an ordinary burglar depends on speed, acting quickly to avoid detection and reduce personal risk. Attempting to physically remove another person creates a major obstacle, greatly increasing the chance of confrontation with authorities. In Walder's view, the severity of what Nancy endured points to an intruder driven by a deeply specific and disturbing objective. This was clearly not a spontaneous act. Someone chose that home with intention, guided by a far darker purpose. That realization pushes investigators to move beyond surface-level assumptions and examine a more troubling connection, one that may trace back to the victim's own family, particularly her daughter, Savannah Guthrie. As a highly visible presence in national media, Savannah's public profile introduces risks that extend beyond her own life. Walder emphasizes that such prominence can unintentionally elevate an entire family into a potential target, even if the direct victim is not the primary focus of the motive. The nature of the crime reflects a level of precision that feels entirely inconsistent with randomness. Whoever entered that house did so with a grim and clearly defined plan already formed. Additional forensic evidence continues to reinforce the idea of a carefully orchestrated disappearance. Surveillance footage from the entryway captured a figure whose identity was concealed by gloves and a mask. The individual was seen carrying a black Ozark trail hiker pack and wearing a tactical holster for a firearm visible beneath specialized clothing. Experts have dismissed the presence of this gear as anything but intentional, pointing instead to the unmistakable signature of someone who prepared every detail in advance. A person arriving equipped in full tactical attire and visibly armed is not acting on impulse or seeking a quick escape. This suggests patience and readiness for a prolonged operation. Morgan Wright describes the scene as resembling a rehearsed sequence executed with precision. Such coordination is rarely the work of a single individual operating alone. Removing someone from their own home without leaving a trace is an extremely complex undertaking, one that typically requires more than one participant. Although authorities have not confirmed this publicly, the likelihood of an accomplice is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Analysts reviewing the evidence are leaning toward the conclusion that multiple individuals may have been involved. Meanwhile, warnings from law enforcement are spreading throughout the Catalina foothills area, urging residents, especially those in high-value properties, to strengthen their security and remain constantly alert. These types of advisories are generally issued when there is suspicion that the victim was monitored over time prior to the incident. Sheriff Nanos has also introduced a critical new element, revealing that investigators may already understand the motive behind the crime. However, disclosing that motive at this stage could compromise months of covert investigative work. In complex cases, withholding such information is often a deliberate strategy to protect key evidence known only to the perpetrator. Even so, a definitive conclusion about the motive has not yet been reached. Former NYPD investigator David San warns against focusing too narrowly on a single theory, noting that doing so can distort the interpretation of new evidence. When investigators become fixated, they risk shaping facts to fit a narrative that may ultimately prove incorrect. In his assessment, the currently available information does not fully explain why Nancy was specifically targeted. He stresses that the investigation must remain grounded in evidence, wherever it may lead. Unfortunately, when official language begins to reflect logistical considerations rather than hope, it often signals a darker outlook. It suggests that authorities are beginning to consider the most tragic possibility, that the victim may no longer be alive. The increasing openness in addressing this outcome indicates that the direction of the investigation is shifting and the balance of probability may now be leaning toward a far more somber conclusion. The investigation has now entered the bleak and unsettling phase of what authorities describe as a no-body homicide case. The focus has shifted into a far darker space where justice must proceed without the presence of physical remains to confirm the crime. This critical transition occurred once the Nancy Guthrie case was no longer treated as a simple disappearance. In the beginning, officials urged patience, but as time passed with no meaningful breakthroughs, the tone among experts has changed significantly. Former federal agents have made it clear that this is no longer a rescue effort. Morgan Wright, speaking from his position at the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, has acknowledged that both time and forensic indicators now point toward the likelihood of homicide without a recovered body. This scenario reflects a chilling reality where the probability of death becomes overwhelming despite the absence of remains. Investigators are basing their conclusions on several fragile but concerning factors, including Nancy's age and her deteriorating health condition. At 84 years old and dependent on ongoing cardiac care, Wright emphasizes that her chances of survival have become extremely unlikely. Without access to critical medication, surviving weeks in captivity would be nearly impossible. In cases involving elderly victims, authorities are often forced to consider fatal outcomes much earlier, especially when there is no communication from those responsible. Another deeply troubling sign is the complete lack of progress. In most genuine kidnapping cases, some form of communication is expected, often involving ransom demands or clear indications of financial motivation. In this case, however, there has been nothing but silence. While there were reports of messages, none were ever officially authenticated, and there has been no confirmed proof that Nancy was alive after her disappearance. According to Wright, this absence of communication suggests a disturbing possibility that the original plan may have gone wrong in a catastrophic way. One working theory is that what may have started as a financially motivated abduction quickly spiraled out of control. If Nancy was intended to be used as leverage and the situation collapsed, it could explain the sudden and total silence that followed. Such a failure would account for the abrupt end of contact and the lingering uncertainty surrounding the case. From an investigative standpoint, this silence may represent the aftermath of a plan that ended in tragedy. Understanding the nature of a no-body homicide is crucial in explaining why authorities have adjusted their strategy. In a typical missing person case, the priority is to locate the individual alive, with search teams focusing on possible shelters or survival locations, while detectives pursue sightings and check medical facilities. However, once a case is reclassified as a homicide without a body, the entire approach changes. The focus moves away from rescue and toward building a forensic framework that can demonstrate a probable violent death. At this stage, the investigation becomes far more complex and somber, centered on piecing together evidence that supports a conclusion without the confirmation that a recovered body would normally provide. This phase of the investigation focuses on identifying subtle indicators of violence, such as disturbed ground, signs of struggle, or concealed locations that may point to a hidden crime scene. Even in the absence of a recovered body, forensic teams continue their work with persistence, building a case from whatever physical traces remain. Prosecutors are now faced with the complex challenge of establishing two critical elements in court: proving that the victim is deceased and determining who is directly responsible. Details within the Nancy Guthrie case file indicate that investigators are already operating under this difficult assumption. The turning point came with the discovery of evidence suggesting a violent confrontation at her residence. Forensic specialists confirmed the presence of Nancy's biological material on the porch of her home, a finding that dramatically altered the direction of the case. The detection of blood points strongly toward a struggle that may have escalated beyond control. In situations where individuals simply go missing on their own, such evidence is rarely found. Its presence forces authorities to consider the likelihood that the event involved a fatal physical encounter. Compounding this concern is the complete absence of any verified proof that Nancy has been alive since her disappearance. Since the early hours of February 1st, there has not been a single confirmed communication from her. There have also been no credible sightings that investigators have been able to verify or support with evidence. Additionally, there is no indication that she has reached out to her family in any way. Analysts note that in legitimate kidnapping cases, captors typically maintain communication to preserve leverage, often providing proof that the victim is alive. In this instance, however, the silence has been absolute. As time passes, the possibility grows that those responsible may no longer have control over the situation. Early reports of ransom messages have only added confusion to the investigation. Some media outlets claim that demands for cryptocurrency payments were made in exchange for her safe return. However, investigators were unable to authenticate these messages as they lacked supporting images, audio recordings, or any reliable confirmation of Nancy's condition. There was no concrete evidence that she remained alive after those messages were sent. It is well documented that opportunists sometimes exploit such tragedies by sending false claims in an attempt to profit, making it increasingly difficult for authorities to distinguish genuine leads from deceptive ones. Equally concerning is Nancy's fragile medical state. Her survival depended on a strict regimen of essential medications, which could not be skipped under any circumstances. Yet all of these medications were found untouched inside her home. For someone with serious cardiac issues, missing even a short period of treatment poses a life-threatening risk. This reality significantly weakens the possibility of a prolonged abduction and instead points toward a far more tragic and irreversible outcome. Then the pacemaker data becomes a critical voice in the timeline. At roughly 2 a.m., its connection to her smartphone abruptly disappeared, cutting off without warning. Because synchronization depends on close proximity, that sudden loss strongly implies an immediate and possibly violent separation. It marks a disturbing break in continuity. This raises difficult questions. Was the device forcibly torn away? Did it suffer physical damage? Or did the signal cease because her heart stopped altogether? Perhaps she was moved into a place where the transmission could no longer function. It is important to pause and consider the weight of that silence from the monitor. What truly caused that chilling drop in signal? Was it the result of a struggle, an abduction, or something final? While investigators have not publicly detailed the technical failure, the timing itself feels deeply ominous. That exact moment has become a haunting piece of evidence, a point emphasized by seasoned investigators reviewing the data. Taken together, these elements begin to form a stark and troubling picture. Rick Castigar, a veteran with decades of experience in law enforcement and ties to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, has remained consistent in his assessment. He argues that if this had been a kidnapping for ransom, the perpetrators would have needed to keep Nancy alive, as a deceased victim offers no bargaining power. When her age, vulnerability, and the absence of essential medication are considered, the outlook becomes bleak, leaving little room for survival. From a professional standpoint, the psychological profile suggests that what may have begun as an abduction attempt quickly unraveled, resulting in a silent and unresolved case. Up to now, officials have avoided labeling the situation as a murder when addressing the public, continuing instead to frame it as an active search in the hope that Nancy might still be found alive. However, the language used by experts hints that a more serious shift has already occurred behind closed doors. As the case moves into increasingly uncertain territory, attention has turned toward how the initial response was handled. Some analysts believe that critical mistakes in the early hours may have compromised the investigation. There is growing concern that these early missteps may have diminished the chances of achieving justice. Questions are being raised about whether the investigation was hindered from within. The case has now entered a darker phase, widely regarded as a potential homicide without recovered remains. Public unease continues to grow, accompanied by rising criticism of how the situation was managed. Retired investigators have openly questioned the slow pace of the initial response, asking why it took so long for authorities to adjust their strategy as leads began to fail. Morgan Wright, after closely examining the case, believes it should have been treated as a homicide from the outset. With evidence of a struggle, a vulnerable victim, and no confirmed proof of life, he argues that the warning signs were clear from the very beginning. Given her fragile medical condition, Routine procedures were simply not enough to meet the urgency of the situation. Experienced investigators understand that such cases demand an immediate and decisive tactical adjustment. Any hesitation in making that shift risks allowing critical physical evidence to fade with time. Memories begin to distort, and valuable leads quickly lose clarity. This concern was echoed by Rick Castigar, a former senior official in Pima County, who noted that during those crucial early days, the investigative team appeared to lose control of the case, shifting from proactive leadership to a reactive stance. According to expert analysis, several of the search operations conducted after her disappearance were fundamentally flawed. Rather than being guided by strict forensic protocols, they seemed influenced by public pressure, reflecting an urgent attempt to respond to growing concern. These efforts lack the structure and discipline of a coordinated search strategy. Castigar explained that when investigators allow public opinion to dictate direction, they risk chasing unproductive leads, diverting attention toward dead ends that offer no meaningful progress. In doing so, they lose valuable time pursuing distractions, instead of focusing on evidence that could move the case forward. One of the most heavily criticized missteps involved how Nancy's residence was handled as a potential crime scene. Errors were made within the home itself, a fact later acknowledged by Sheriff Chris Nanos in a public statement. He admitted that the property may have been released too quickly after the initial examination was completed. That decision could have unintentionally compromised or even destroyed crucial forensic evidence left behind by a possible intruder. Although investigators initially believed the home had been thoroughly processed, new leads eventually forced them to revisit the location. By that time, however, media presence had already surrounded the area, complicating efforts to preserve the integrity of the scene. Photographs began to surface, showing small traces of what appeared to be blood that had not been identified during the first sweep. These images quickly spread, becoming a disturbing element of the case and raising further questions about the thoroughness of the initial investigation. Troy Hillman, a veteran homicide sergeant from Phoenix, warned that such foundational mistakes can severely weaken an investigation. In forensic work, once a scene is compromised, the original state can never be restored. Evidence may be altered, contaminated, or permanently lost, often without investigators realizing the extent of the damage. Even the smallest details, fibers, fingerprints, footprints can be destroyed the moment a scene is exposed to uncontrolled access. Hillman emphasized that returning to a compromised environment makes it nearly impossible to treat it as a reliable source of evidence. Additional criticism has also focused on delays in securing digital surveillance from the surrounding area. In criminal investigations, the first 48 hours are often considered the most critical period, when valuable footage from doorbell cameras and security systems must be collected before it is automatically erased. Nearby homes and businesses should have been canvassed immediately to preserve this data, as most modern systems overwrite recordings within a short time frame. Concerns have been raised that this window may have been missed, allowing potentially vital footage to disappear. The efficiency of modern recording technology, while beneficial in many ways, also means that crucial evidence can be lost quickly if not secured in time. As a result, skepticism has grown within the community, with many questioning whether delays in the early stages of the investigation may have cost investigators key opportunities to uncover the truth. At the same time, a flow of internal leaks began to surface, undermining public confidence and drawing sharp criticism. Hillman explained that releasing sensitive information too early creates complications that investigators struggle to overcome. When suspects become aware of what authorities know, they adapt, changing behavior and covering their tracks. This gives them the opportunity to eliminate remaining evidence and avoid mistakes that might have exposed them. In complex investigations like this, internal communication can quickly become disorganized, turning into a tangled system where clarity is lost. He noted that as information moves through layers of bureaucracy, its accuracy often deteriorates. Critical details can be delayed, misinterpreted, or entirely lost before reaching decision-makers. However, the controversy surrounding the case was not driven by procedural issues alone. It also became deeply personal. Sheriff Nanos faced growing public backlash following decisions that were widely questioned. The situation escalated when he was seen attending a college basketball game while the search for Nancy remained unresolved. Although he defended his presence by stating the tickets had been purchased months earlier, the public reaction was severe. Seeing the lead figure in the investigation at a public event, while a vulnerable individual remained missing, sparked anger across the community. The optics were damaging, reinforcing the perception of misplaced priorities. As time passed without significant progress, tensions intensified, and a political opponent took action by initiating a formal challenge. This legal effort aimed to remove the sheriff from his position, accusing him of failing to properly handle the investigation. In response, Nanos maintained a composed stance, asserting that public scrutiny of leadership is justified. Despite mounting criticism, he continued to defend his department's actions. The situation escalated further when members within his own agency issued a vote of no confidence, revealing internal divisions. This development broadened the scope of scrutiny, leading to a deeper examination of his past conduct. The Pima County Board of Supervisors organized hearings to review previous statements he had made under oath. While unrelated directly to Nancy's case, these issues intensified the pressure surrounding his leadership. According to former FBI agent Jennifer Kafender, the greater challenge lies in how the public perceives these missteps. Once doubt takes hold, restoring trust becomes extremely difficult. Even strong investigative work may not be enough to repair the damage. She pointed to similar high-profile cases where early mistakes continued to overshadow progress. In Tucson, this growing skepticism has shaped the overall narrative, with many residents expressing concern that the investigation has stalled. There is an increasing sense that answers should have emerged by now, especially given the intense media attention in the early stages. With no suspects identified and only limited information available, fears are growing that the case could fade without resolution. Although authorities insist the investigation remains active, much of the work has shifted out of public view into a quieter analytical phase focused on evidence review. Without visible progress, however, the community is left questioning whether the process has broken down. As criticism continues, a troubling theory remains at the forefront that this may be a homicide without a recovered body, supported by the absence of any signs of life and the belief that the act was deliberate. Still, some hold on to a small measure of hope. The question that lingers is whether Nancy could still be alive somewhere, waiting for help that has yet to come. In the immediate aftermath of her disappearance, her family held on to optimism while authorities carefully evaluated each detail. But as weeks passed without answers, the tone surrounding the case grew darker. This shift was reflected not only in official statements, but also in the voices of those closest to her. One of the earliest emotional changes came from Savannah Guthrie, whose initial social media message carried a tone that stood apart from the usual appeals for a safe return. She stepped away from the expected tone of unwavering hope, instead addressing her mother's fate with a quiet, heavy sense of acceptance. While she initially stated that the search was still ongoing, her words carried an underlying acknowledgement that her mother may no longer be alive. Drawing from her personal beliefs, she suggested that Nancy could already be reunited with loved ones who had passed before her. This message resonated deeply with those following the case. As Savannah spoke, it became clear that the family was beginning to confront the possibility that Nancy's life had come to an end. She referenced the idea of her mother returning to the faith she had long embraced, rejoining her parents, her brother Pearson, and others who had gone before her. Although it stopped short of an official confirmation, this moment marked a shift where hope gave way to a more painful acceptance. The fragile illusion of optimism began to break, exposing the family's growing realization that the outcome might be tragic. More recently, the exact wording used in their public statements has drawn intense scrutiny from observers closely tracking the case. In one message, they expressed a desire to bring Nancy home and honor her life, but also included a striking phrase about not finding peace until she is laid to rest. To experienced analysts, this language carried significant weight. Families who still believe a loved one is alive typically speak about safe returns and reunions. References to a final resting place, however, often signal a shift toward accepting death. Such phrasing rarely appears unless hope for recovery has begun to fade. It reflects a psychological transition where the mind starts to prepare for loss. Journalist Brian Enton observed that this subtle change in wording reveals far more than it appears on the surface. Having followed the case closely, he interpreted it as the beginning of a grieving process, a gradual and painful move toward accepting an irreversible reality. He noted that over time, hope seemed to diminish as silence replaced any expectation of communication. Initially, the family may have anticipated some proof of life, or even ransom demands, but none materialized. As days passed without any sign, the tone surrounding the case darkened significantly. Anton emphasized that families often weigh every word they release publicly, and such changes in language can reflect information received privately before it is officially disclosed. Other analysts and experienced investigators have echoed similar conclusions. Morgan Wright has remained firm in his assessment, acknowledging that while emotion urges hope, the evidence suggests otherwise. The circumstances point toward a conclusion where survival becomes increasingly unlikely. Given Nancy's health condition and the time that has elapsed, the situation aligns with patterns often seen in violent crimes. From a forensic perspective, the case now appears less like an active kidnapping and more like an undiscovered homicide scene. One theory suggested that she may have been taken across the border into Mexico in search of concealed medical assistance, but investigators found no evidence to support this scenario. If such an attempt was made, it may have ended in failure, potentially explaining the complete absence of further communication. Authorities continue to explore other possible motives, including the idea that the crime could be connected to Savannah's public profile, making the family itself a target. Another line of speculation involves a nearby individual rumored to have recently acquired unexplained wealth. Though this has not been confirmed, detectives continue to evaluate every possibility, even those that seem unlikely. There is also the possibility that events spiraled beyond the perpetrator's original intentions, transforming into something far more severe. Cases like this often reveal how quickly plans can unravel under pressure. For now, the investigation remains active with evidence and surveillance materials undergoing renewed examination. A substantial reward has been offered in hopes of generating new leads. Authorities have stated their commitment to uncovering the truth. But as time continues to pass, the central question has shifted. It is no longer simply about locating Nancy, but understanding what ultimately happened to her. The answer, when it comes, may be far more devastating than anyone anticipates. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, and the investigation continues as many wait, wondering how long it will take before the truth finally comes to light. What are your thoughts on this case? Could Savannah's public profile really have played a role? Drop your theories in the comments below. Smash that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe out there.